Hi, I'm Rebecca from yarnandchai.com, and this is the companion tutorial video for the Eva Cardigan, which is an easy level pattern on my blog. Now, normally when I make tutorial videos for my patterns, I include the full written pattern in the video. But I designed this cardigan for 9 different sizes, extra small up through 5XL, so it would have been a lot more difficult to put the full pattern in the video. So instead, I'm going to walk you through each technique that you'll need to create the pattern, but you'll need to use the written pattern to find your stitch counts and row counts for the size that you'll be making. So there are 2 ways that you can follow along with the written pattern. You can use the free version on my blog, or you can grab a copy of the ad-free PDF version from my PDF store, and I will put the link for both of those in the description below. Both versions include the exact same information. The PDF is just free of ads and laid out better because of the format. So in this tutorial, I'm going to teach you how to start the linen stitch, how to complete what I refer to in the pattern as regular rows and decrease rows, how to change colors, how to finish the sleeves, how to seam it all up, and how to add the collar at the end. So let's get started. So this whole pattern is made from the linen stitch. You're going to be completing 7 different sections. There's going to be 1 back panel, 2 front panels, 2 sleeves, and 2 pockets for 7 sections total. And the one thing that all of these sections have in common is the linen stitch and how they begin, okay? So I'm going to teach you how to start the linen stitch. And before I start, I just want to point out a couple of things. Now, this information is in the pattern if you want more details on it, but I have 2 hooks here, even though the pattern only calls for 1 hook. The hook in the pattern is a 4.5mm G7 hook, and you're definitely going to want to check your gauge before you settle on this hook, especially because the yarn that I use in the pattern is an extremely thin number 3. Thin enough that I don't even think it should qualify as a number 3 yarn. But again, all of that information is in the pattern. Okay, so I have my main hook that I'm going to use for pretty much the entire pattern, but I also have an E-hook, which is a 3.5mm hook. So this is 1mm smaller than our normal hook. I have this one because when I start the linen stitch, it almost always ends up larger in the first couple of rows, and then the fabric starts to pull in. And I have my theories about why that happens with the linen stitch, but it happens very consistently whenever I do the linen stitch. So my recommendation to you, even when doing your gauge check, is to use a 1mm smaller hook for the first, the initial chain, and also the first row, and then we're going to switch to our normal hook, okay? Now, if you don't have a hook that's a little bit smaller than your main hook, then you can use your main hook. Just make sure that when you do the first chain and the first row, you're using an extremely tight tension to kind of help offset what that does, okay? And then I also want to point out I am not using the yarn that the pattern calls for the first few parts of this tutorial because, again, it's a very thin yarn, and I really want you to be able to see my stitches really well for this tutorial. So while I'm teaching you how to do the linen stitch, I am going to just be using a little bit thicker cotton yarn that's nice and smooth, okay? Alright, so let's get started on the linen stitch. Again, every section of the pattern starts the same way. So you are going to make your slip knot. You're going to check the pattern to find out how many chains you should make for whichever section of the pattern you're doing and whichever size you're working on. For this tutorial, I am just going to do 22 chains. Okay, so there's my chain to start the linen stitch. So this is going to be the same no matter what size you're doing and what section you're working on. We are going to single crochet in the 4th chain from the hook. Okay, so the loops on your hook don't count as a stitch. So 1, 2, 3, 4. we're going to single crochet, and I just go into the back loop of that stitch. It doesn't really matter too much on this pattern what you do, so you do whatever you are comfortable with doing. Okay, so what we just did, we single crocheted in the 4th chain from the hook. So what we have now, the chain that wraps around here, that counts as our first chain 1 space. And then we did a single crochet, so it counts as the first single crochet. The linen stitch is simply a repeat of chain 1 space, single crochet, chain 1 space, single crochet, okay? So we just did our first 2. So that's the chain 1 space and the single crochet. Now what we're gonna do is chain 1, and we're going to skip a chain. So skip this one right here, and we're gonna go to the next one, and oops, and single crochet. And that's what we're gonna do the entire way down the chain. We're going to chain 1, skip 1, single crochet in the next. Chain 1, skip 1, single crochet in the next. And this is going to be row 1 of every section of this pattern. The only thing that is going to change is your stitch counts. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to teach you is how to do what I refer to in the pattern as a regular row. So to make the written pattern not ridiculously long, instead of writing this out for every single line, I decided to just call it a regular row. So anytime the pattern calls for a regular row, what you're going to do, and I'm actually going to switch out my hook because I have done my chain and my first row. So now I am to my gauge hook. This is the hook that I was able to meet the pattern gauge with. All right, so switching out my hook, a regular row is chain 2, and this chain 2 counts as the first chain 1 space, and turn our work. Then we're going to single crochet in the first chain 1 space that we made. And after that, we're going to do a repeat of chain 1, single crochet in the next chain 1 space all the way across. Okay, so let me help you with how to locate this. And I promise you, the hardest time that you're going to have locating these chain 1 spaces is on this first initial regular row. After that, it's going to get a lot more obvious, but it just looks a little bit different. Things are a little bit more smushed together when it's crocheted into the chain, so it's not quite as obvious, but I'm going to show you a foolproof way to figure it out, okay? So we chained 2, and then we have, so these are the 2 that we just chained, and then this set of loops right here, that's the last single crochet that we made on the previous row, okay? So the next set of loops right here, this is the front loop and that's the back loop, that is the chain 1 space that we made, the last one that we made in the previous row. So directly below that, you're gonna see a space, and that is where you are inserting your hook right into that space. When you put your hook in there, it's gonna feel like kind of a larger space, and that's good. That means that you're in the right place. So you're gonna make a single crochet, okay? And then you're going to do the repeat all the way across your row. You're going to chain 1, and you're gonna single crochet in the next chain 1 space. So this would be our next stitch right here. That's the single crochet. So this is going to be your chain 1 space area. You're basically going every other stitch to find that chain 1 space to single crochet in. Chain 1, single crochet in the next chain 1 space. Chain 1, single crochet in the next chain 1 space. And you're going to do this all the way across your row. So go ahead and practice a few of those, or if you are actually working on your pattern, go ahead and do as many as the pattern calls for. And the next thing I'm going to show you is how to change colors. And actually, you know what? Before we move on from this, this last chain 1 space is probably the hardest one to find. So I've chained one and I still need to get one last single crochet in here. So just so you are aware that there's still one in there. So I've got my single crochet right here and then the very last stitch, chain one space. It just doesn't have as big of a hole because it was created a little bit differently than the other ones were, but you still need to make sure that you're getting your hook in there and you're doing your last single crochet, otherwise your stitch counts will be off. Okay, so go ahead and do whatever you need to do on the pattern or practice a few of these if you're just practicing right now, and the next thing we'll do is a color change. So when you come to a color change in the pattern, this is how I recommend changing colors. If you have a preferred method, you can use your preferred method. If you are unsure, then you can use my method. So go ahead. There's never a point in the pattern where you don't need to fasten off. So anytime you change color, you can fasten off your yarn and switch to the new color. So I'm bringing in some pink here, and I have completed a regular row. What I'm going to do is attach my pink and pull it through, and then I'm going to pull down on that blue and hold it back here with my finger, and then I'm going to find the end that's not attached to the skein and add that under my finger. So now I'm holding both down, okay, and then I'm switching hands and holding it with this finger. And I'm going to pull it down tight, okay? And then I'm going to chain two, and I'm just going to go ahead and continue. Turn the pattern, single crochet into that first chain one space, chain one, single crochet into the next chain one space, and I'm just going to continue with the pattern as written. Simple way to do your color change. The next thing I'm going to show you is how to complete a decrease row, and the only time you're going to encounter this is on the sleeves, so you don't need to worry about it until you get to that part of the pattern. When you do, and you come to a row that says decrease row, this is how we're going to do it. You're going to chain two and turn your work just like usual. And this is the only part that is different. Instead of single crocheting in the first chain one space, we're going to single crochet two together, SC2 tog, over the first two chain one spaces, okay? So if you've done a single crochet two together before, it's the same concept, except instead of going into the next two stitches, we're just going over the next two chain one spaces. So chain one space, okay? So what you're going to do is insert your hook into that first chain one space, yarn over and pull your yarn through. You've got two loops on your hook now. Then you're going to insert your hook into the next chain one space and grab that yarn and pull it through, and now you have three loops on your hook. You're going to yarn over and pull through all three loops, and that is a single crochet two together over two chain one spaces. And we did our chain two at the beginning before we turned, and so we still have our we've created a chain one space and a single crochet. All we've done is we've reduced the total row count by 2 stitches. So we've eliminated one chain one space and one single crochet. And then you're just going to go on and do the rest of the row just like you have been doing the whole time. We're not going to decrease the other side. Whenever you come to a decrease row in the pattern, you'll notice that it's actually going to be 2 decrease rows right in a row. The reason for that is because with the linen stitch, for whatever reason, when you decrease at the beginning of the row, it's not quite as severe. When you decrease at the end of the row, it's very jagged looking. So instead of decreasing in one row both sides, because we do need to decrease this evenly, I just put 2 decrease rows together, and you can't even tell in the end. So chain 2 and turn, and we're going to assume that we're doing another decrease row because they do stick together in twos. So I'll show you one more time, and the reason I want to show you one more time is because I want to show you what happens when you get to the end of a row that was decreased, because it does look very different. Okay, so again, you're going to single crochet 2 together over that chain 2, the 2 of those chain 1 spaces. And then you're gonna go ahead and complete the rest of the row by chaining one and single crocheting in the chain one space. Get down to the end here and I'll show you what I mean. Okay, and as long as you're counting your stitches, you're going to know when you've reached the end and you need to do just one more single crochet. It almost looks like I probably have 2 more single crochets to fit in here, but I don't, because this row that I'm crocheting into right now, this was a decrease row, and this is where the decrease was located. So we have a single crochet 2 tog kind of smushed into here, and if I count my stitches, I can verify that I only have 1 more single crochet to place. Now, if you are to the decrease part of this pattern, you've probably gotten really good at identifying exactly where to put your hook. But when you work into this single crochet 2 together, it's just kind of a mess of threads right here. So what you're gonna do is you're just gonna kind of look for that V that you've been working around before. You've got these V's over here, and you're just gonna insert as close to the edge as you can get. Just kind of stick it somewhere. When you've got this in your hand and you're looking at it up close, you'll see that you have some options for where to insert your hook. It's really not, it's not a science. Just be consistent each time you do a decrease row, okay? So that is how you do the decrease row, and next we are going to finish the sleeves. So now I'm going to teach you how to finish the sleeve, and I'm going to show you on an actual sleeve because it'll be easier this way. But I have my sleeve almost finished here, and where I'm at on the pattern is I have just finished row 85, and 85 was a color change. It doesn't matter what size you're making. 85 is a color change, so I have changed to my lighter color now. And I'm going to show you from row 86 on. I'm going to go through the ribbing and everything. For row 86, here's how I want you to think of this. For this entire pattern, and if you're actually doing the pattern at the time of this video, you have the linen stitch down. You could probably do it in your sleep. And you've probably been thinking of this pattern just as a series of chain ones. So for this row, only row 86, I want you to kind of shift that thinking and start thinking of it in terms of individual stitches, not just chain one spaces. So each chain one is a stitch, and each chain one space is a stitch, okay? And the reason we're doing that is because we have to decrease this just a little bit. And what we're gonna do to decrease it is we're going to chain 1, not 2. We've chained 2 this entire time. This time we're just going to chain 1 and turn our work. This is going to sound a little bit complicated, but you'll get into a rhythm, okay? So for every 3 stitches, we need to make it 2 stitches, and that's how we're going to decrease this pattern. Let me zoom in for you. So for the first 3, we have a single crochet, a chain one space, and a single crochet. So our instructions say single crochet in the first stitch. So normally we've been jumping to this chain one space. We're not going to do that. We're going to single crochet right into that single crochet. Okay? And then we're going to skip the first chain one space, which is right here, and we're going to single crochet into the next single crochet. And we have just turned 3 stitches into 2, okay? Next, we're going to single crochet into the next chain one space. So that's the very next place we can put our hook. Single crochet into the next chain one space, and then we're going to skip the single crochet that comes right after it, and we're going to single crochet into the next chain one space. So we just took those 3 stitches and turned them into 2. That's the pattern that we're going to repeat all the way across the edge of our sleeve here. We're going to single crochet in the next single crochet, skip the chain one space, and single crochet in the next single crochet. Single crochet in the next chain one space, skip the next single crochet, single crochet in the next chain one space. And that's what we're going to do all the way around. So basically you're looking at the next 3 available stitches, and you are single crocheting into the first one, skipping the middle one, single crocheting into the last one. Looking at the next one, single crocheting into the first part, skipping the middle, single crocheting into the last part. Every 3 stitches becomes 2. And if all of your stitch counts are correct at this point and you do this row correctly, you will be able to complete that repeat and you will end perfectly at the end. So I'm going to go ahead and see if I've got my stitch counts correct. So I'm on my last repeat now, single crochet, single crochet, single crochet, and my last one goes into that chain 1 space. Perfect. All right, so that is row 86. The next thing we're going to do is add the ribbing on the sleeve. And if you have been following my patterns for a while, you have definitely seen this technique already. I do have a much more clear and in-depth video about this technique, and I'll link it in the description below if you need a little bit more help. I know this is not the easiest thing in the world to see with this teeny tiny yarn, so if you need a little bit more help, you should definitely check out that video on how to add ribbing at the end of your crochet project. But I will give you a little rundown on it right now. So we're going to keep our hook inserted for this next step, and we are going to start adding our ribbing. We do not crochet the ribbing separately in this pattern. We just go right into it. We're going to chain 17. For row 1, we're going to turn our work over, hanging onto this chain, and we're going to single crochet in the second chain from the hook and each of the remaining 15 chains. So you should get 16 single crochets out of this. So first chain from the hook, we're skipping single crochet in the second chain from the hook. It's a little bit hard to do it on camera because I am lifting my project up and it's pulling down. Should be easier if you're sitting with your crochet in your lap. So just go ahead and single crochet all the way down that chain. I'm just going into the back loops, and I will have 16 single crochets when I'm done. Okay, so I have 16 single crochets down this chain, and the next thing I'm going to do to complete row 1 is I'm going to slip stitch into the first single crochet from row 86. This is row 86, so anytime I say row 86, this is the row that I'm talking about. We're going to work our way this way, okay? So what you're going to do here is you're going to slip stitch into the first single crochet, which is right here from that row, slip stitch, and then you're going to slip stitch into the very next stitch from row 86. So you've done 2 slip stitches, and that is the completion of row 1. For row 2, you're going to chain 1 and turn your work. Now what you're going to do is skip over the slip stitches that you just did, and you're going to start single crocheting in the back loops only of these stitches along the chain. Okay, so it's really teeny tiny, but let me show you. This first set of loops, not the loops on your hook, but the first full set of loops, that's the chain 1 that you just did. So that does not count as a stitch. And these next 2 sets of loops right here, those are the slip stitches that you did along row 86. So the instructions say to skip over those. So you're skipping your chain 1 and you're skipping your 2 slip stitches. This is the first stitch we're going into right here. And we're going to single crochet into the back loop only of that stitch. And we're going to single crochet all the way up this line, back loops only until we get to the very last one. And in the very last one, we are going to put a single crochet into both loops. So each time you get to this end of the ribbing, you're going to do a single crochet in both loops, but all of the other stitches are always going to be in the back loops. Okay, so I've done all but the very last one, and I'm just gonna single crochet under both loops of that one. So for row 3, we're going to chain 1 and turn our work. And we're gonna work our way back down. So we're gonna single crochet in that first stitch, both loops, and then we're gonna single crochet in the back loop only of each of the remaining 15. This is row 3. This is one of the rows that you're going to repeat now that we've set up our ribbing. So you're going to go back and forth between rows 3 and 4 to finish up the ribbing on the arm. Okay. Okay, so that is 16 stitches total. And now I am going to slip stitch into the next stitch along row 86. So I've already worked into this one. You have to really pay attention to whether or not you've already worked into a stitch. The most common issue people have with this technique is they'll look at this and think that it hasn't been worked into yet, and so they'll slip stitch there. If you do that, you are going to create way too many rows of ribbing, and your sleeve is going to be really wavy and it's going to look strange. So just make sure that you know that this one has already been worked into. I can see the loops that I worked into it, okay? So I'm going to go to the next one, I'm going to slip stitch to it, and then I'm going to go to the next one and slip stitch to that one as well. We always do 2 at a time. And then chain 1, turn my work, and row 4 is the same as row 2. We're going to skip over that chain 1, we're going to skip over the first the 2 slip stitches that we did, and we're going to single crochet in the back loop only of each of the first 15 stitches of this ribbing, and then the very last one we will single crochet in both loops. Okay, last stitch, single crochet in both loops. And as you can see, the ribbing is starting to form here, so you're just going to go back and repeat rows 3 and 4, going up and down all the way across the sleeve edge, okay? And then you're going to have a whole thing of ribbing. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then when I come back I will show you how to seam up the sleeve, and then we'll start seaming the rest of the project. Once you've finished the ribbing on the end of your sleeve, you can fasten off a long tail. We're going to use that to seam up the ribbing, and then I'm going to show you how to continue seaming up the rest of this arm. So go ahead and thread your finishing tail through your yarn needle. And right now this is reversible, so it does not matter if you seam it up like this or you seam it up like this. Just pick the way that you want to do it. And I have mine folded right now so that the tail is coming out of the layer on the bottom. There's a layer here and a layer here, and the tail's coming out here. If your tail's coming out here, it really doesn't make a difference. It's the same concept either way. So let me zoom in a bit here, and I'm just going to show you quickly how I seam up the ribbing part. So as you can see, on the side that has the tail, you have sets of top loops because these were actual stitches. On the side that doesn't have the tail coming out, you have what look like top loops, but this is actually the bottom of your chain because we started with that chain 17 at the beginning. Okay, so what you're gonna do to kind of keep the look of the back loops only ribbing going is whenever you go into the stitches on this side, you're going to only go into the stitch, the loop that is closest to this side. So each time you go through, you're going to go into that loop and that loop, all the way down. Okay, so we're just, it's kind of like a back loop only thing. We're just doing a little bit different because we're seaming right now. Okay, so what I would do here is I would first reach across to the very first chain, and I'm going in from the inside, and then I'm going to come across back to this side, and I'm going to insert from the bottom up through the center of that V, again only going through that single loop. And then I'm going to go back across to the next chain. And then I'm going to go across to the next set of loops, go right in between them, like that. And so what I'm doing here, this is called the mattress stitch, and this is the stitch that we are going to use all the way throughout the seaming of this entire cardigan. So you're just going through the stitch on one side, and then you're coming back and going up through the stitch on the other side, and you're going to go ahead and do this all the way down the ribbing. Okay, and once you get to the end of the actual stitches that are on the ribbing, you're still going to have about 1/2 inch worth of this color of yarn to seam up. That was not part of the ribbing, it was just those couple of rows before we started the ribbing. So you're going to just go in the exact same style and just kind of pick a place to put your yarn needle that's towards the top, just grabbing a strand or two, going in the exact same motion until you get to the end of that color. There we go. Okay. After that, you can weave in this end because we are going to switch to our next color. Every time we seam something up on this cardigan, we're always going to use the same color as the fabric that we're seaming. And it does mean that you're going to have some extra ends to weave in, more than you normally would if you just seamed it with the same color all the way down. But trust me, it just looks better in the end. Okay, so you can fasten that off. And you have this starting tail of the light tan, and you can weave that in now or at the end. It's up to you. The next color is the brown for me, and I have this long tail because in the pattern, and hopefully you did notice this as you were creating the pattern, in the pattern it tells you on the sleeve whenever you fasten off a color you should fasten it off with kind of an extra long tail because we're going to use that tail for seaming. So I'm going to use this long finishing tail from this color to seam this section right here. And we are just going to continue in the exact same way that we have been seaming this color. Okay, so you're just going to go across, and again there are no loops on here because we are working into the ends of rows. These are row ends and there's no perfect loops to work into. So what you want to do is just make sure that you have this lined up really well. This is a stretchy fabric, so it's really easy to start seaming it and then get to the end and realize that maybe it looks like this and whoops, that's not good. So just make sure every few stitches that you're glancing over here and these color changes are still lined up, okay? And then just hold your fabric together. And in the same motion, you're just going into each row end and you're gonna go up through the stitch. So going across to this row, I'm going up and through the stitch. And then I'm going across up and through the stitch on the opposite side. And I'm going to do that all the way down. And you are kind of eyeballing where you're going to put your hook, your yarn needle, sorry, and that's okay. It's not going to be at all noticeable once you turn this right side out. All right, so making sure my color changes are still lined up, I'm going to go ahead and seam the rest of the way down this color. When I finish this color, I'm going to weave in this tail, and then I'm going to pick up the long pink tail and continue down, and I'm going to do the same thing all the way to the end of the sleeve, and then I will weave all of the leftover ends in at the end. Okay, so I have all of my ends woven in now, and as you can see, my sleeve is completely seamed. And right now it is still inside out. If you want to reach in and flip it right side out just to look at what the seam looks like, that's fine. Make sure that you put it back to inside out though, because you're going to want it inside out when you seam it to the body of the cardigan. Okay, so making sure that it's inside out. I've got both of my sleeves here ready to be added. I'm going to fold those up and set them aside. The next thing we're going to do is we are going to start seaming together the entire cardigan. This is the second to last step. The very last step is going to be adding the collar, but seaming it together is so exciting. I know that seaming in itself is not very fun, but it's really fun to just kind of watch this all come together. So I'm not going to be able to get this whole thing on camera, but I am unfolding my back panel right now. And I'm going to take one of my front panels. The first thing that we need to do is seam the top of the front panels to the top of the back panel. And I'm going to show you this little chart on the screen here to show you kind of the steps that we're taking as we seam. So what you're going to do, and I am going to have all three of my colors of yarn handy right now because as I go through the different seaming steps, I'm going to need to be accessing all of those different colors. So I have them all ready to go. And here is the color that I'm going to be working on first, this dark brown. So what I'm going to do is look at the area that I need to seam. This is it right here. What I have is I have it lined up with the back panel all the way over to the right. And once again, these panels are also reversible. They're the same on the front and the back. So as you seam them together, it does not matter. You're not looking for like a right side or a wrong side. It does not matter. So just pick a side and line them up and then cut yourself some thread long enough that you'll be able to seam this. Okay, and then thread it through your yarn needle. And you were going to do the exact same thing that we did before with the mattress stitch. So what you need to do is right into both corners there, go through both of those corners to begin, and then pull your yarn through far enough that you are still leaving a tail that you can weave in at the end. So make sure you don't accidentally pull it all the way through. So when you come up through the stitch, you're actually going to go through both loops. Like that. And then you're going to go directly to the next stitch on the opposite side. Go up through both loops and then across to the next stitch. And you're just going to do this all the way across, making sure that you are doing a 1 stitch to 1 stitch ratio, that you're not skipping stitches, that you're not going into a stitch more than once. So go ahead and do that with the mattress stitch all the way across the top of this front panel. Okay, so once you're done going across that first panel, you can weave in your ends if you want, or you can leave that for later. And what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to do the exact same thing. Let me find my next panel here. I'm going to do the exact same thing on the other side. And of course, it probably goes without saying, but make sure that you're lining up your color blocks and that you're not doing this like upside down, because then it's not going to look quite as nice. Go ahead and cut yourself a nice long thread and do the exact same thing on the other side. And a quick tip, If you are nervous about lining this up exactly right and starting from over here, because we crochet right to left, or left to right if you're a lefty, and so we're going to have to start here and then really hope that we got it exactly lined up over here. You can do that, or you can just flip it over. In this way, you can still start at the right corner, because it's more important that this corner is lined up than that this lands on a particular stitch. If this side is off 1 or 2 stitches, that is really not a big deal, but we want the corners to be lined up. So flip your cardigan over and then repeat the process on this side. Okay, so I have finished attaching both of the front panels to the back, and I also went ahead and wove in my ends quickly. And so what we have right now is this, it's not attached at the sides yet, just at the ends, at the tops. And the rule of seaming cardigans is that you seam them all completely inside out. Now, I had said before that there's no right or wrong side to this fabric, which is true, but now that we have started seaming, we've determined which side is the right side and which side is the wrong side. And right now we have wrong side out because this is what we just seamed together. So imagining that this cardigan was completely done, we would now turn it right side out, and this would be the side that you see, the side that's going to rest on your shoulder. So right now we have this cardigan inside out, and we want to make sure that it stays that way the entire time. So the next thing that we need to seam is the arms. These arms are both exactly the same, so it doesn't matter which one you pick to start. Just again, make sure that your arm is still inside out. This is probably the trickiest part of the seaming process of this cardigan. And let's see. Okay, so I highly recommend, I know we're seaming 2 different colors together here, but I do recommend using this color, which would be your color B, to seam this together, because at the end the B's do meet right here. And if you're real careful with your seaming, it's not going to matter too much. It's not like you're going to have a big bright line of color B going through there. It's going to be okay. Okay, so cut your yarn to seam this up. And my tip, you can do this really whatever way you want to. The way that I have found is the safest as far as lining everything up. First of all, you want to make sure that your arm is bent, folded right at the seam so that the very top of the arm is in line with the very top of the cardigan. And what I like to do is seam this with 2 separate pieces of thread. The first piece of thread, I'm going to start here and I'm going to do the front of the arm to the front panel, and I'm going to seam down like this and stop here. I'm going to weave in my ends. The second thread of yarn, I'm going to start at the top and I'm going to do the back part to the back panel, going down, this is along the back side of the arm, going down, and then I'm going to use what's left of that thread to go ahead and continue down to seam up this part that is still color B, and stop here and then weave in my ends. Right now we're going to seam together the ends of rows. So these are the row ends on this color A part, which means that they don't actually have stitches to work into. And then we're going to be seaming it to the first row of the arm, which does have stitches to work into. So this would be the bottom of the chain when we started to make the arm. So you're seaming the row ends together with the stitches, and you're going to use a 1-to-1 ratio here, which means that for every stitch you're going to seam it together with the end of a row. And you can tell the rows on this if I hold this up, and you'll see this much better on your fabric, but you can see these little loops that come up. This represents every other row has one of these loops coming up. So you have a row here and then a row in between the loops, and then a row in the loops and a row in between the loops, row in the loops, row in between. Okay, so for every row end, it's going to match up with one stitch. Hopefully that made sense. We are going to go ahead and get started. So making sure that everything is lined up very nicely, I'm going to insert my yarn needle at the top of the sleeve. And then I'm also going to insert it at the top of the front panel. And I'm going to pull that through, and then I'm going to continue on with the mattress stitch just like we have been doing this entire time. And helpful tip, make absolutely sure that you are not accidentally seaming, pulling up threads from the back of the sleeve or from the back panel, because if you do that, you're actually going to sew this part shut and then you won't be able to get your arm through it, and that would be really sad. So it does feel a little bit tricky, but just making sure that you are not grabbing yarn from those bottom sections. Okay, so you're coming up through the stitch, and then you're coming up through the end of the row and pulling, and then you're going back across to the next stitch, and then back across to the end of the row. And you're just going to do that very carefully all the way down. Okay, so that is the end of the front part of the sleeve. And now what I'm going to do is just flip it over. And now I just have to seam up the back part. And again, I am going to seam the back of the sleeve together, and then I'm going to continue on right down the side of the cardigan. And I'm going to keep doing the mattress stitch all the way down until I get to my next color. And then I'm going to weave in those ends too. Okay, so I have the first arm completely seamed on there, and I have it also seamed down to the next color down the side of the cardigan. And what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to continue down the side of the cardigan all the way down, and again I'm going to be changing thread colors to match the section that I am seaming together. It's a pain, but again, it's going to be worth it. So go ahead and do exactly what you've been doing with the mattress stitch. Just go all the way down the side of that cardigan. So once you've finished seaming up the side, you can go ahead and attach the arm on the other side and seam up the other side of the cardigan. And then you should have everything put together. We just have to add the pockets and then the collar. So go ahead and turn your cardigan right side out now to attach the pockets, because of course we want the pockets to be on the outside of the cardigan. And for placement, I set my pockets 3 rows up from, here, let me show you. This is the bottom of the cardigan, so this is the final color block. And my pocket matches the final color block. So what I'm doing is I'm counting 3 rows from this color, and then that's going to be the bottom edge of where I have my pocket. And then I'm counting 3 stitches in of this color, 3 stitches in, and that's where the side is going to line up. Now it looks centered between the edge and the seam on this one. I'm working on an extra small cardigan, so there's not a lot of space at all between the edge and the seam. So it looks like it's centered, but if I were working on a larger cardigan, say it came out, well, let's say it came out to here, the seam was right here, I would still want my pocket to be 3 stitches in from the edge, not necessarily centered. And you can play with it if you decide that you want your pocket somewhere else, in a little bit different positioning, then you go ahead and do that. Just make sure you pay attention to what you're doing so that you can do the exact same thing when you attach the other pocket, because you do want them to mirror each other. And you should have a long tail attached to your pocket from the instructions when you made the pocket, which said to fasten off, leaving a very long tail for seaming. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to sew around the edge, only these 3 edges, of course, to leave this open for the pocket. And then weave in your end and do the pocket on the other side. If you need to pin this in place to help you out, then definitely do that. Our final step is to add the collar with color A. So what we're going to do is lay a foundation by starting at the bottom corner of the front panel, and you can look on this diagram to see exactly what I'm talking about. And the spot that's marked on that diagram is the spot that I am in right now. We're going to be working a regular row, which you've been doing for most of this cardigan, a regular row up the side of the cardigan across the middle of the back panel and back down the other side. Okay, so since there are no stitches to work into along the edges of the panels, because again, we're working into the row ends, we're going to be treating each row again as 1 stitch. Okay, so what I want you to do, let me zoom in really good here for you. So we're going to attach yarn A in the corner and chain 2. I can get a hold of my yarn here. Chain 2, and that's going to count as the first chain 1 space as usual. And if you look closely, I may have to redo that because it's going to come loose as I explain this, but if you look really closely at this fabric, again, you can see where every other row has this bump that comes up. And those are the bumps that I'm going to be working into, because again, with a linen stitch, we skip a stitch every other stitch. And so we know with those markers right there, we know exactly where we need to put our hook. So let me reattach this so it's not quite so loose. And chain 2. And then single crochet into that bump that we were just looking at the edge of the row. And then chain 1, skip the next, not really stitch, but stitch, and then single crochet into the next bump. Chain 1, single crochet into the next bump. And you're going to do this all the way up the side until you get to where the side and the back panel meet. And then I'll show you how to make that transition. Okay, so I have worked my way up the first side of the cardigan, and now I am to the back panel section, which is not very big. As you can see, it's just this little part that I have to get to, and then the other side panel starts over here. So I just wanted to show you, we're just going to keep going right around that back panel, and we do actually have stitches to work into on the back panel. So we're just going to keep going with the exact same pattern. Chain 1, skip 1, and single crochet into the next chain 1 space. We actually have chain 1 spaces to work into here because this was done in the linen stitch. So chain 1, skip 1, single crochet into the next chain 1 space, and you're going to do that across the back part of the top part of the back panel. And when you get to the next corner and you're ready to go back down the side, again, you're going to be going into those top bumps down the bottom. And so you're just going to do the exact same thing that you did on the way up. Just make sure that you are inserting your hook into every other row end and chaining 1 in between. And you're going to do this all the way down to the bottom corner. So once you get down to the final corner, make sure you get a single crochet into that last corner. And then you're just going to do 11 more rows of the linen stitch, so 11 regular rows where we just chain 2 and we turn our work and we immediately start single crocheting into the chain 1 spaces, and you're going to do that up and around and down the cardigan, and you're going to do 12 total rows to finish off the collar. Of course, if you want a thinner collar, you can do fewer rows. If you want a thicker collar, you can do more rows. So that is everything that you need to know to complete the Eva cardigan pattern. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and you found it helpful. And you can always check my blog, yarnandchai.com, for lots more modern, simple patterns. Thanks for watching.